Hello, I'm reading from Genesis, so if you want to read along, you can open up to Genesis chapter 37, verses 18 to 28. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. "Here he comes, the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him." Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off his beautiful robe he was wearing, and they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming towards them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt.
Tonight we're going to be talking about forgiveness, and Joseph is an interesting character to study this, the topic of forgiveness. And I would actually say that forgiveness is a fairly complicated topic. It's not as clear cut, I think, as like just forgive somebody for what they've done to you, or God just forgives you. Forgiveness is quite complex. It's not easy to do. I mean, the thing within our Christian circles, it's a common word we use, like just forgive. So we're going to be talking about Joseph and sort of walking with him through his journey and see how he shows us how we might also forgive when things don't go our ways. So the best way I guess I could maybe illustrate forgiveness is there is this story in the Bible, this parable that Jesus gave us about the king who forgave a servant who had a huge debt. Some of you might be familiar with this story, the unforgiving servant. So this king forgave this man an unsurmountable amount of money. Like, this guy owed the king so much that he couldn't repay it even if he wanted to start now and for the rest of his life pay it off. It was such a big debt that this man could not pay it, not even a chance. But the king forgave him for that and said, "You're okay. I'll let you go. You can live your life. The debt is clean." So then he goes off and then finds his own servant who owes him maybe $100, and he's like, "Mate, you got to pay me that now." And then the guy's like, "No, I've got to consolidate my finances. I've got to figure that out first before I give you that. Give me a bit of time." And then he's like, "No, you give me that money now." And the thing we learn here is that although this servant was forgiven by the king, the expectation is that you extend forgiveness also then to other people. So once again, in this story, we're talking about God who forgives us an immeasurable debt, and the assumption is because we've been forgiven so much, we should also forgive other people too, even if it's just a small, minor thing in comparison. So this is sort of what we need to understand. And if I was to define forgiveness, I mean, it's very hard to define it, but if I was to define it, I would say it is to abdicate, it is to surrender and cast off the due punishment that someone else deserves, because we realize that justice is not our own responsibility, but it is God's responsibility. Forgiveness is that somebody deserves, obviously, punishment for something they've done to you, but it isn't your responsibility, it is God's responsibility. And we'll see this picture as we talk about Joseph tonight, as we walk through the story. And he obviously had a pretty rough life. Not terribly rough, but he had some pretty rough situations. And we're going to walk through that tonight. Am I changing the slides? Sweet. All right, let's pray, and then we'll get into the word. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you so much for what you've done on the cross, and thank you so much that we can be here tonight, and thank you so much that you've given us this story of Joseph and that we can learn from it and that we can unpack this complex and interesting topic of forgiveness. I pray that we would learn something and that we'd be challenged by it, and I pray that we would grow because of it. Amen. All right, if you would open up with me to Genesis chapter 37, verse 2. We're going to be first meeting Joseph here. So that is Genesis 37, verse 2, verse 4. It is also up on the screen. I want to read it for you now. Genesis 37, verse 2 and 4. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. And he was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the brothers, they hated him and could not even speak peacefully to him. This is the word of God. So we're first introduced to Joseph, and there's a few things we already notice about him. Okay? He's a bit of a snitch. He gives his dad, bad reports about his brothers, all right? Now, I know that if you've got siblings, I've got 4 brothers. When your brother's snitching on you, it's just, mate, no one likes that guy, all right? So once again, Joseph hasn't really set himself up well, but at the same time, he's young, he's 17, his brothers are all older than him, and they're doing their job, and Mr. Goody Two-Shoes over here telling their dad about how they're not looking after the sheep or not over there or whatever. I don't know what their brothers were doing necessarily in this situation, but whatever he said to his father, it just made his brothers more angry, all right? And Joseph was also the favorite son of Jacob, so in this it's Israel. The favorite son. Now, this already puts him on a bit of a pedestal. It means that he is elevated above the other brothers. And to sort of really drive that home, he receives a colourful coat. And in those days, I would imagine a coat and weaving that together would have been quite tedious and a bit of a chore, a bit of a task. And all of a sudden, he's receiving a coat with many different colours. And that would have been very wealthy and very valuable. So his son, this son, Joseph, he's very well looked after. He's got the best coat, and his brothers are like, oh, we can't even speak to him. We hate him. They can't, like, I just sort of imagine you're at the dinner table and it just erupts because he makes a comment. You know, he just brings about this sort of tension with him because of his favoritism and also because of his, or assumed pride. But it's, of course, I'm assuming a lot of this, but I think you can sort of get that sort of picture from the story. So immediately we already see that there's family tension. And because of this favoritism, the brothers resent him and despise him. And this starts to compound over time. It starts to build up. And, well, we'll see what happens later. So anyway, all this bitterness, I reckon it actually fueled, it probably fueled Joseph in a way. It probably gave him a bit of energy. I know that there was this funny situation. Me and my brothers, it's probably not the best and most healthy behavior, but we sort of take joy from each other's suffering. It's not the best. But I remember my brother, I won't say his name, but he was obviously getting a little bit too cozy with these turtles that my dad had got from the market in Papua New Guinea. So you just buy turtles. And he was obviously, I don't know what he was doing with it, but the point was that it ended up biting him on the chin and just clamping down. And it's just dangling down on his chin. The thing is, as well, is it took us all a while in the house to actually react. He's in pain, screaming, and we're all like, oh, there he goes again. He's got the propensity for weird sorts of situations, that boy. So anyway, he's got this turtle dangling down his chin, and he's in pain. And not even my mum immediately reacted. I mean, I think she was concerned immediately, maybe slightly concerned, but we didn't react. It wasn't like, oh no, we need to help him. I think my first reaction was, once I actually saw him, was to die in laughter. I just couldn't. It's not probably the best response, but I imagine, in a similar sense, this sort of hatred that the brothers felt for him would have fueled him. I know that if my brothers were angry with me, it'd be like, it motivates me. So I think, I don't know if you guys have grown up with brothers, this is the sort of dynamic you have. And I'm just trying to paint that sort of picture right now, that Joseph was probably like the goody two-shoes, and it didn't require that much to really set the brothers ablaze. He just irritated his brothers. He really did. And to make it worse, we haven't read this in the passage, but if you go further down, it says that he received these dreams. And he shares them with his family and receives even more hatred because the dreams that he received were, well, I mean, they're probably a bit conceited. I mean, he's obviously very full of himself. So he receives these dreams about his brothers essentially bowing down before him. And that was the imagery. So he had stalks of wheat and bowing down to his stalks of wheat, and then his planet and every other planet bowing down to him. So there's this picture of him being sort of the center of the universe and everybody bowing down to him. So this made his brothers even more angry with him and even more resentful of him. So this is the scene. Joseph is Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, the favorite son. He's proud. And his 11 brothers absolutely hate him. They absolutely despise him. All right? So anyway, one day Jacob says to Joseph, hey, mate, I need you to go check out the boys. They're obviously out there somewhere. I don't know where they are. I think they're out in Shechem. Can you go check on them? So he sends Joseph out. He's obviously getting a little bit older now. He can go on little adventures alone now. He doesn't need a parent with him. So he goes out to check on his brothers. And he goes out and he finds these shepherds in Shechem and he says, I'm looking for my brothers and they're not here. So that's not a great start for his brothers, I guess. They're not in Shechem where they were supposed to be. And then he goes, one of the shepherds is like, okay, he's in there. They said something about going to Dothan. So Joseph is like, yeah, I'll go to Dothan then. I'll just make this an extra trip, go a little further away. So he goes out, not really expecting what would happen. So as he comes across the ridge line, the brothers see him and they see his colourful coat glimmering in the sunlight, and they knew exactly who he was. He was very recognisable, and the brothers started to conspire with one another. They're like, oh mate, this guy needs to go. And we've got a chance right now. We've actually got a chance right now to kill this guy and eliminate him from our life. So I've never got to that point where I've wanted to do that with one of my brothers. So this is a pretty bad point. They've got to the brink where they want to just like, this guy needs to go. We don't like him anymore. So they start to conspire, and they even suggested that they would actually kill him. But his brother Reuben, as Talia read before, said, no, we shouldn't actually kill him. We should come up with some other ideas. So they were brainstorming creative ideas on what to do with Joseph. So then they decided that they would throw him into this cistern. So a cistern is a deep pit. It's where you get water from. And well, if you get thrown into a cistern, you're not going to be able to climb out of it. It's also very deep. I would imagine as they threw him into it, he would have scraped up against the edges, probably broke a few bones, and just crunched on the ground. It would have hurt. His brothers obviously just resented him. I sort of also imagine that they were spitting at him and just jeering at him as he was in the pit. So this Joseph wasn't necessarily a bad person, but whatever he did, all those different little factors compounded, and the brothers became increasingly more resentful and hateful of Joseph. All right. So as he's in the pit, once again, they have a little bit of a meeting. They have dinner actually together, and they're like, yeah, what should we do with him? And then these Ishmaelite traders come by, and they're like, okay, we'll sell this guy off to the slaves. At least that way we don't have to kill him. At least we can get some money out of him. We get some value from this guy, our brother. So they sell him off. And they sell him off, and he goes off to a faraway land where his father isn't, and is being brutally betrayed by his brothers. And for us tonight, there's this illustration, which is the bag. And betrayal is our first scene. The first stone in the bag is betrayal. Joseph has been betrayed, and the weight upon his shoulders is getting heavier. He's been betrayed by those he loves. He's been taken away to a land where he doesn't know anybody, a culture that he doesn't understand, a people that have a different language. He's been ripped away because of the resentment and the hate his brothers had for him. Now, could he have changed the circumstances? I don't think so. Whatever it was that was involved in this situation, whatever forces were at play here, the thing is his brothers sold him off into slavery, and they absolutely despised him. So the bag is getting heavier. And a lot of you might have received those stones, and we'll use that later in in the finale, all right? So look after them, all right? Sort of think about what sort of things those stones might represent for you, all right? So the first scene for us is betrayal. Joseph has been betrayed by his brothers. Scene 2. Genesis chapter 39, verse 6 through 10. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with Joseph and found favor in his sight and attended to him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had not a single concern about anything but the food he ate. So now Joseph is in Egypt. He is a slave to Potiphar. And we get a bit of a picture here, which seems rather positive. He seems to be doing all right. He's somehow worked his way up, and he's actually in a pretty prestigious person's home and is now actually managing it. It seems pretty good. All right, he's been made the Lord the Lord over the house. He's been put in charge of every single aspect of of Potiphar's life, essentially, except of course his wife. And the thing is that because there is an interesting thing here that we need to draw attention to, which is this: the Lord was with Joseph, and this is obviously the thing that we need to all understand: is that in all of this, it was the Lord that was with him. It was the Lord that was always alongside him, even in every situation, okay? So the Lord was with Joseph, and whatever Joseph did, he caused him to succeed. Whatever Joseph did, it just did well. And this is the scene here, is that he blessed Potiphar's home because of Joseph's sake. And that's an interesting thing. So how does this fit into the narrative of forgiveness? Well, I mean, I would also kind of draw attention to the imagery of recovery and healing. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it takes time. I mean, I remember another one of my brothers. I'm using a lot of my brothers tonight because I felt like there was a lot of brother sort of motifs in this story. So one of my brothers, he tore his meniscus, and he was doing long jump and just tore his meniscus, and he didn't heal for years, really. He couldn't do anything. His athletic aspirations kind of were crushed pretty quickly after that. But as he pursued the physio, as he got a few surgeries, I mean, over time, he redeveloped the function of his knee. He developed strength in it. He could do his hobbies again, his athletic hobbies. And I mention this because as Joseph's old life starts to fade from view, as he now lives in this probably more familiar culture now, as he's there, he starts to heal up a bit. He starts to make the most of his situation. He starts to actually make something out of it. This is something that I really admire about Joseph, is his rebound. He just betrayed, works hard, elevates, does the best for the God's glory. He made the most of the negative situation and just persevered. So yesterday I watched the grand final between the Swans and the Lions. I don't know if any of you are really into AFL up here, but sweet. I love AFL. I don't love it, but I enjoy it. I'm a fourth generation Sydney Swan supporter. So when they got absolutely ripped apart. I at least hoped for a little bit of a competition, but afterwards I listened to some of the post-game interviews, and one of the coaches made a comment that there's no use sooking about it. I mean, it was pretty shook. There's no use sooking about it. We'll come back next season stronger. I mean, the rebound. And Sydney over the last 12 years have been in the preliminaries 5 times. I mean, they also got absolutely annihilated by Geelong 2 years ago too, so they have a bit of a track record with that. But they had a good season this season. But the thing is it's no use sooking about it. We'll come back next season stronger. We'll grow from this. All right? This is the mentality. I see this as Joseph's mentality. Even though it seems like his circumstances were difficult and there was lots to grieve about and there was lots to be heard about, he just threw himself into those situations, did the best he could, and made the best of those situations. And those situations happen for us all the time, though. We get derailed a lot. There are lots of things that can derail us, like betrayal. Okay? There's lots of things that can derail us, but Joseph is like a template for us. We see that we see that God was with him, but we also see that even though this bad thing happened to him, he was able to persevere and do the best he could with the situations he was in. And as a consequence of this, he brought blessing upon the people he worked for. He brought blessing to Potiphar's home. He brought blessing to that family. And the family thrived because of him. So from his pain, he brought blessing to those around him. So don't discredit the sorts of things you come out of, because God will use that as a blessing to those around you. You couldn't imagine, really, but that's what we see here in the story of Joseph. But, the big B-U-T word, the story takes a sour turn. Potiphar's wife started to really desire him because of his attractive physique and just exceptional personality. I don't know what it was. Lots of factors involved. The thing is that Potiphar's wife was like, mate, this dude is better than my husband in every way. So anyway, Joseph resists her attempts. Well, she persists. So obviously he's just managing the house, doing his duties. Obviously Potiphar's wife is just hanging around, just waiting to pounce at him. Anyway, one day he walks into doing his duties, and then Potiphar's wife just grabs his cloak, and must have grabbed it pretty hard, because Joseph is like, what are you doing? Runs away and leaves the cloak behind. It's it's not the best sort of situation for anybody to be in, really. But this is the situation he's in. And the thing is that when there was a few attempts by Potiphar's wife, he said this: why would I betray Potiphar by doing such a thing? Because he has given me authority over this household. The only thing he has withheld from me is you. Okay? So Joseph respected his role, but he also would not betray Potiphar. And we already know that Joseph has already experienced the pain of betrayal. And that sort of pain is pretty deep. So why would he reciprocate and do the same thing to Potiphar? It doesn't make sense. So he runs away from this situation. And we also see another thing as well, is that in chapter 39, verse 9, it says, how then could I do this great wickedness and a sin against God? Sin against God. The thing is that, yeah, you could sin against Potiphar and just do this thing with Potiphar's wife, or you can say, ultimately, you're actually not sinning against Potiphar's wife or Potiphar. You're actually sinning against God, the ultimate creator of the universe and judge of the universe. Like, this is the theme tonight, is that ultimately God is the judge, all right? So you need to know who the judge is. You need to know who you're ultimately accountable to. Yeah, you might screw up with Potiphar, but you're ultimately accountable to God. And Joseph understood this. He fled the scene, and because he fled the scene, the wife of Potiphar falsely accused him, and this is where we're at now. He's been falsely accused of rape, essentially. That's what the story is. It's pretty rough. He's been falsely accused, and he's been doing a good job, but he's been falsely accused. He's been completely derailed again, and he's in the pits again. He's been thrown into the pit, okay? And just sort of remember that imagery of the pit. Okay, the pit. It's a deep and dark place. So another stone, he's been slandered, he's been derailed, he's been betrayed. And once again, he finds himself in the pit. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how will he recover? How will he bounce back? But Joseph is the bounce back king. He knows how to do it. So once again, he's in the prison. We go to now scene 3. He's been cast into prison, which is the king's prison. And in this prison, he's probably surrounded by, well, a lot of the king's prisoners, all the higher echelon sort of people in society that have either been corrupt or just annoyed the Pharaoh, and they just were sent to prison. So whatever it was, whatever variables were at play here. The thing is, it says here in Genesis 39, verse 20, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. This guy just turns everything to gold. He once again thrown into prison, ascends the ranks, does a good job, essentially assumes the position of the prisoner keeper. I don't know what it is about this guy, but he's pretty extraordinary. But once again, it says here, the Lord was with Joseph. So what makes Joseph quite incredible is that he's ordinary, but God is with him. You see, he was betrayed, but God was with Joseph. He was accused, but God was with Joseph. So from our perspective, things might happen. From our perspective, things might happen in our lives where it seems like God is not even near us. Like, why would these things happen? But we experience all of these kinds of unexpected turns in our lives. And all these kinds of hurts are inflicted upon us, and even by those closer to us. But the thing about all of that is that God is with us. That is the promise that we receive here, is that God is with us. God is there, even when it just seems bad and sour. And just because it seems one way doesn't mean it's true. Just because it feels like God's far away and is letting all of this unfold, it's not. And as we sort of progress through this story, we'll see how God perfectly weaves the story together into a story of redemption and forgiveness. So once again, Joseph brushes off his accusations. He quickly rises to power, and he assumes the role of the prisoner keeper. So anyway, I'll try to progress a little bit quicker now. There are these two fellas that come into prison, the baker and then the cupbearer. And these two fellas have dreams, and Joseph interprets their dreams. Now, what's interesting about the cupbearer's dream, the cupbearer's dream is that there are 3 branches, and that from these 3 branches, he will crush the grapes and pour them into the cup of the king. So the interpretation that Joseph gave the cupbearer was that in 3 days, you'll be restored to your position. Just remember to tell him that I interpreted your dream, because I want to get out of this pit as well. So that was sort of one condition he put onto the cupbearer, was that if you tell the Pharaoh, you would let the Pharaoh know, I don't want to be in this pit anymore. I want out. I want to leave this place. So we can assume all sorts of things about Joseph's emotions at this time. Obviously, he's been wrongfully accused. But anyway, he tells this cupbearer to tell the Pharaoh what his interpretation was. The second interpretation for the baker was far more negative. He had the dream that he had a basket on his head full of bread, 3 loaves of bread, and in 3 days there were birds feeding on his head, literally, because he was hung on a noose and executed. So it was a bit of a dramatic turn for the baker. So his interpretation on one hand was positive for the cupbearer, but on the other hand, very negative for the baker. But the thing here is that when the cupbearer went back to the Pharaoh, he forgot all about what Joseph had done. And there we have the third stone. He's forgotten. After all that he did, forgotten. He was in prison for probably a couple more years at that point. Forgotten, helpless. So what do? Well, we need to talk a bit about the pit for a bit. You know, pits are not the most comfortable places. In chapter 37, verse 50, it says, Genesis chapter 40, verse 15, it says, "For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." There is this motif, or at least this theme, of Joseph being in a place he doesn't really want to be. He doesn't want to be here, but he's doing the best he can to be there and do the best he can in those situations. So the pits are a place that we're cast into, mostly against our will. None of us are willfully throwing ourselves into betrayal and accusations and being forgotten. None of us are willfully doing that. But in this situation, he's been thrown into this pit. Okay, maybe if Joseph wasn't so proud and arrogant, maybe the brothers wouldn't have betrayed him. Maybe if Joseph hadn't been such a hard worker and attractive man, he wouldn't have got seduced by Potiphar's wife. I mean, what variables could he change in his life to fix the situation? I don't know. Maybe if Joseph hadn't been all the more memorable, maybe he should have thrown a joke a bit or something. I don't know. The cupbearer forgot all about him and didn't tell Pharaoh about him at all. So if anybody had a reason to be resentful and bitter, it was obviously Joseph. Joseph had every reason. But in these situations, God was using the pits in Joseph's life as a place for preparation. So think of it like this. The pits are pits of preparation. They're places where the Lord has you because he's preparing you for something. And as we see, and I'll just quickly sort of gloss over a lot of this story, is that Joseph eventually has an incredible rise and an absolutely dramatic change. Okay, the Pharaoh has this dream, which is confusing him, and the cupbearer then remembers. There was this guy in prison who could interpret dreams. So then the Pharaoh summons him, and Joseph correctly interprets the dream. And the dream was that in 7 years there would be a drought, but the first 7 years would be of plenty. So then Joseph gave a bit of a strategy, gave a bit of a plan for how you might prepare for this drought. And then they were all amazed at him because what sort of man could come up with sort of a solution to this plan, this problem? And they then put Joseph in charge of literally the entire nation under Pharaoh. So Pharaoh, Joseph. An incredible story. This man rose from literally the pits to the palace. This guy, absolutely incredible transformation. And then he was married into a priestly family, which is sort of symbolic of his sort of assimilation also to the culture. But Joseph then had 2 sons, and I sort of want to quickly draw attention to his sons. One of them was called Manasseh, one of them was called Ephraim. Manasseh means that God has made me forget all my hardships and all my father's house. Now, that's pretty symbolic of what he must have been feeling, because he's been ripped away from his family, but now time has passed. Many, many years at this point, maybe 16 to 15 years. He's been forgotten, and God has made me forget all my hardships and my afflictions. All right, and then Ephraim means that for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Honestly, guys, I was thinking even as I was here tonight that Ephraim should be like a word we use. For God has made me fruitful in the land of affliction. Like, let's be fruitful wherever we are. Let's make the most of it. Let's do what we can. All right. Let's not get so bogged down by all the negatives in our lives, and use them for God's glory, and let's not be bogged down by the past and all the mistakes we've made or the things that have been done to us. But let's move forward into this new life that Christ has given us as we follow him. So the pits were rough, but they were necessary, and the pits aren't there to kill us. They're not there to kill us, but they are there to kill the thing or the parts of us that aren't compatible with the nature of God. So if you're in the pit, you're there because God needs to kill something else, something that's wrong with you, essentially. There are parts of our character that need to be killed. All right, so the pits are actually a real blessing, actually. You have to think of it in that terms, that wherever you are, it's a blessing. Where God has put you is a blessing, because even if it's negative in one sense, it's actually really positive in the long run, because obviously God is tackling a certain problem with your character, which is not compatible with the kingdom of heaven. It needs to be dealt with. So the pits are not there to kill you, but they're there to make you more like Christ. And it's obviously in these places that we learn to trust and obey God, and it's also there that we learn to obey him. All right. And we come now to the climax and the final scene, which is forgiveness. After about a couple of years now, 2 years into the famine, his brothers come into Egypt. And after when they see Joseph, they don't even recognize him, because obviously so much time has passed. When they discarded Joseph, he was so young, sorry. He was so young that even seeing him now, he wasn't even recognizable. So Joseph wasn't recognizable. The brothers come to Egypt, and then they're like wanting food, but then Joseph recognizes that they're there, and he tests them a few times, and I won't go into that. We'll sort of gloss over that. But it's important that we sort of understand that the brothers came into Egypt, and Joseph, we're going to skip ahead and we'll just see how Joseph handled that situation. So Genesis 45 verse 1 says, "Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, 'Make everyone go out from me.' So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers." Sorry, this passage is not up there, but in Genesis 45 verse 1 it says, well, I'm reading from that text. "And Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?' But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come near to me, please.' And they came near, and he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there have yet 5 years to come, in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here,'" interesting claim, "but God." You see, Joseph in all of the situation realized that it actually was God. So through this situation, through the betrayal, through the accusations, through being forgotten, that brought him to that position where he could save his own kin, the kin that betrayed him. He realized this. That's profound. That's a really big self-discovery moment. Like this guy knew. Joseph realized that God was somehow woven into this story. He saw that. And I'll just sort of jump ahead. It says here, do not be stressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me here to preserve life. You see, the brothers would have been very anxious. They would have probably thought, my goodness, he's going to kill us. There's lots of reasons why he might kill them. So they were fearful. But he invites them into his home. He invites them down to Egypt, actually, and they get looked after by his family, by Joseph's family, and also by Egypt. So that's how they came down to Egypt, and there's a lot of history behind that, and there's lots of things there as well. That leads to the Exodus and all sorts of stuff. So it's cool. But they come now to Egypt. They're provided for because of this famine, and because Joseph was sent there to provide the food. And finally, he says in 50 verse 15, the brothers actually doubt that he forgave them. When Jacob died, okay, the brothers were like, maybe he's going to kill us now. And then Joseph says, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? And this is one of the most important things I want to draw attention to about forgiveness, is that we are not in the place of God. Who are we to assume that position of judicator and judge and executioner? We can't assume that position. When somebody wrongs us, we have to understand that God has cleared a much bigger debt, a much bigger debt than that person has committed against us. All right? And then because of that, we wouldn't want to condemn that person because God is so gracious and amazing and forgiving. So Joseph is like, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? All right? And this is the extraordinary forgiveness that we see in this story, is that am I in the place of God? Can I actually not forgive you? No. Because, I'm assuming the position of Joseph in this situation. Can Joseph really say, I can't forgive you after what God has done for him? Really? Can you say that? And it's a hard thing. But what God has done for you, essentially says you should forgive others. You should say, it's all right. Yes, the bag is heavy and it weighs down with lots of things, but God forgives that. All right, so let's wrap this up. God was with Joseph in the pits, and the pits are a dark place, but they're useful. Joseph was also great at rebounds, all right? We need to get good at the rebounds, guys. When you fall down, we need to bounce back up and just push on and do the best we can, all right? And ultimately, forgiveness is to abdicate and surrender and cast off the due punishment that someone else deserves because we realize that justice is not our responsibility, but the Lord's. It's a hard thing, but I think it's the best thing. We need to understand that it's not natural to forgive, but it's something that God has done for us, and therefore we reciprocate. It's something that we do for others. And the pits aren't there to kill us, they prepare us for what God has in store for us. And sometimes it is easier to forgive others than it is to forgive ourselves. And that was something I didn't quite build up on as much because I was rushing. All right. So I'm now going to just pass it on to Ray. He was going to lead us through some time of questions.
All right, don't run away. You've got that QR code up on the thing. Just come and just play while we take some time. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to ask any questions you have about the sermon. You can put the QR code back up on the screen. Thank you, guys. And any questions you want to ask, I'm giving you just 2 minutes while Matteo plays, just to make you feel more comfortable. Let's go. See any questions there? I can't see any. see any questions? You can see? I can't see any. Just do the QR code. There we go. Thank you. Here we go. Good question. Is Joseph a picture of Jesus?
Joseph is, there is a lot of parallels, you could say. He is raised up to be a savior, somebody who comes from a very unlikely position and ends up being in the most powerful position, somebody who humbles and who's come through the mire and the difficult situations, hard situations of lots of self-denial, and ends up actually saving the nation and saving the world at that particular time. It's a picture of Christ, because Christ ultimately came for us to save us. When we are famished and when we're hungry, because life ultimately doesn't satisfy us, we can go to Christ, to the land of Egypt where the food is, which is Christ himself, the kingdom of God.
I think the other one is that Joseph never gave in to sin like Jesus, and the other thing is that Joseph saved his people, and so did Jesus save his people. So that's where we see the shadow of Jesus. Good. Okay, Nicolai, another one. Is the sermon more about personal resilience or about leaning on Jesus when you are down, or both?
So I really wanted to emphasize forgiveness. I wanted us to paint a bit of a picture of how it might have been for Joseph to come to that point where his brothers came and actually arrived to him. I wanted to expand on that more, but I did feel a bit of time constraint there. So I did feel a bit rushed, but that's all right. The thing is that the main point here tonight is that forgiveness is the main part I want to communicate here, is that there are some things in our lives that we need to forgive. We need to forgive others, and we need to forgive ourselves. There are people that have hurt us, and we need to say no more. We're not going to give them that power over us anymore. We're going to give that power to God and let God make us right and make that situation right.
Okay. The other one is, why was he concerned about what he ate if the Bible says not to worry about what you eat?
What was I need a bit of context for that.
Why was he concerned about what he ate if the Bible says not to worry about what you eat?
So Potiphar, I think this is referring to when Potiphar said that he would not worry about anything except for what he would eat. So when Joseph was in the house, when Joseph was managing the house, the only thing that Potiphar would worry about was what he would eat. That's the illustration. That's the only thing he would worry about, whether he would have chicken tonight or pig.
Okay, good. I think we've answered some questions.
There we go.
All right, you wrap it up for us.
Yes, let's do it.
Thank you.
I want to invite Hannah up. And now these are where your stones come in. There might be something that you want to this is more symbolic, all right? So this is when you do this, it's not like, this is not the salvation, all right? These stones represent maybe something that has caused, that represents hurt in some way. It represents something that's been painful, represents something that's weighing you down. Maybe it's even sin. And the picture I want to sort of cast now is that this heavy load that was upon, Joseph's shoulders, my suggestion is that he laid it upon God. Of course, Jesus wasn't there at the time, but now we have Jesus. And what we need to do is cast this weight upon the cross. I'm going to have Hannah readjust her position up to the front here. I'm also going to invite do you need help with that? Or all right, and I'm also going to invite Megan up and also Kevin up. So Kevin, could you stand up there in the corner? Sweet. So the way I want this to be is a bit processional. What we're going to do with our stones is that we're going to put something upon them, whatever it might be, whether it's anger, whether it's hate, something. Maybe something that's on your heart, maybe a worry or a concern. All right? And you're going to put it into the bag. And I'm going to ask that you would all start from the back and sort of make your way up to the front and then go out to the sides, whatever side you come from, and also take the communion. So what this is a picture of is that Christ has paid the price. The price that, we couldn't pay. The debt that was so insurmountable that it needed to be paid. And this is the thing about forgiveness. There does need to be payment. Somebody pays the price for it. And Christ paid the price for it. So when you cast your stone into the bag, you're symbolically saying, Jesus, I give you this because you will make it right. You'll sort this out for me. You will contend for me. You will be my judge, and you will be the adjudicator. You will make the right call. You're essentially offloading essentially whatever responsibility you might think you have or whatever role you might have to make things right. You give that role to the Lord. So I invite you forward. I'll invite the musicians up first, and then everyone else as well.